wants to speak of India as their shining example of when free trade has hurt people. This completely flies in the face of the fact that developing countries, particularly in Asia, have been some of the best at lifting the most number of people out of poverty. The only reason they're able to do this is because governments can make good decisions for people when sometimes people are too short-sighted and manipulated by politicians and other people and by lobby groups in ways that the government simply isn't to make poor decisions. We think that governments, for the longest time, have served as proxies for decision-making, and we need a much stronger case for proposition as to why this isn't that case. I want to speak about three things in closing the debate. Firstly, the principle of democracy. Secondly, the process of decision-making and who is better at that. And lastly, the end outcomes on the impacts of free trade agreements. Beginning with the principle of democracy. And note that this was one of their largest constructive points, and they want to say that regardless of outcome, people have the right to make decisions about this. They made a couple of claims about this. One, in terms of legitimacy, they say that this cedes sovereignty and allows the fundamental alteration of the economy, and therefore people should be allowed to change this. There are two responses. No, thank you. Firstly, they have never shown you why this is non-unique. Many policies impact the exact way that economies works. Tax policy, what you decide to spend on. Foreign policy, they never drew enough distinctions in terms of ceding sovereignty. But secondly, and this is important, interaction with other countries does not mean that you cede sovereignty in some way. I don't think that we should have referenda on whether or not we should give foreign aid to some other countries, because that people locally may think, oh, I want to be selfish and keep my money, when in reality it might be better economically to help those people in those areas. They haven't shown you why this actually cedes sovereignty in that way. But the second thing they say, no thank you, is that some views are underrepresented and other views are overrepresented, and they say that they fix this. I agree with them when they say that some views are over and underrepresented and we need a balance. The problem is, their side of the house, literally by definition, does not have a balance when you take away any voice that anybody that isn't an individual citizen has, right? They want to remove literally the parliament. So when these guys say, oh, we can have your benefits of like certain interest groups being represented, you can't because they get represented through the parliament that these guys completely want to shut out. I don't see how they have that on their side of the house. The second thing they talk about then is self-determination, that people have the right to self-determination. We gave you two responses. One, the right to self-determination is only legitimate if people can actually make decisions that are in their best interest. They literally dropped all of our analysis on why people are now coerced into making bad decisions. We'll talk about that later. But secondly, self-determination is only important insofar as you get better outcomes for individuals, because that is the purpose of self-determination. I don't think we'd have self-determination if we'd have bad outcomes. And that's the third point of clash they brought you into their point. No, thank you. I'll take you in a second, actually. They said there are no right or wrong decisions. People just have the right to choose. This is a terrible metric for deciding whether or not we should do things, for the reasons of the tyranny of the majority that we talked about on our side of the house. So if 90% of your population decides to vote for slavery, for example, doesn't mean we just implement that. Oftentimes, governments are the best for protecting minority rights in a way that these guys don't have.
Would you be the first speaker to respond to the nuance that FTAs alter the constitutional structure of a country by exposing them to foreign judiciaries, e.g. Australia and the ISDS?
Okay, so the constitutional structure of your democracy is how your government is structured and the way that you vote. This is about economic policy and tariffs, for example. I do not see how this is altering your constitution in any way. We'll deal with the ISDS in a little bit. So clearly, they fall on the principle of democracy because they haven't shown how it's distinct from other policies. Given that, we want to look at why the government makes better decisions. I want to look at two spheres in this. First, the information they have available, and secondly, the incentives that they have. Beginning with information, no thank you. Throughout their entire bench, they only asserted to us that people are smart and they can make decisions. If you check on your flow, they literally had no analysis on why people make good decisions. Compare that to the 5 responses that they dropped on our side of the house given by our first speaker. The fact that free trade agreements, oftentimes the benefits come in the long term, but the harms are in the short term. That somebody isn't able to weigh those as well because they're individuals. The fact that they're unlikely to do research. The fact that they're complex and 6,000 pages long, and people aren't obligated to read them in the same ways that other people are. We talked about how they're swayed by rhetoric. So these guys want to talk about Nigel Farage as a terrible example. Speaking of Nigel Farage, his campaign for Brexit was based on giving £350 million and taking that and putting that to healthcare, and people voted on that. Like 3 days after the vote, he literally backed out and said, well, I'm not sure if we can actually give this money. This is the exact swaying that is worse under their side of the house compared to ours. We said that free trade agreements are hard to understand and people can be manipulated. No response to that. Crucially, this links to self-determination, because if we can prove that people do not have the capacity structurally to make good decisions for themselves because they can be coerced, then the government is the actor that should step in and do that for them. Compare to our side of the house when you have government officials who are making these types of decisions. who are consulting economists, lawyers, who are actually obligated to read these people, and who are experts on negotiating free trade, who have done it for 10, 20 years. I don't see how they can at all talk about why people have the information to make decisions. Their only claim then, no thank you, is that people vote in regular elections, so of course they can vote for this. We gave you analysis as to why this is distinct, that you can vote for proxies because you know generally what ideas they stand under. You know generally that they agree with free trade or that they're against it. But this is entirely different from voting on specific parts of that. Now I want to speak about the incentives in terms of decision making. They said a couple of things. They said in some governments there's lots of corruption. So they talked about Ghana and why MPs get bought out. So firstly, the motion that we're debating is talking about legitimate democracies that can actually represent their people. Insofar as their governments are extremely corrupt, I don't see how they get any change under their side of the house. Furthermore, if they're corrupt, I see no reason why they would actually be bound by this type of referenda that these guys want to support. No thank you. The next thing they want to talk about then is special interest groups and lobby groups and why they disproportionately impact things. They say sometimes they push through bad free trade and other times they reject good free trade. No thank you. First of all, there are 4 responses to this. 1, they never engage with the fact that lobby groups are not all uniform, that there are large lobby groups that are pro-free trade and those that are against. They never engage with the analysis that we have unions, we have civil society, we have a bunch of other groups that campaign on behalf of politicians. The difference with politicians then, and this is analysis that Dasha gives you, is that any decision will make some political group unhappy. This space allows politicians to actually make good decisions for people. I'll take you in 1 second. The comparative on their side then is that people are coerced by lobby groups who can now campaign directly to them. And we gave you analysis as to why only the largest lobby groups now have the ability to campaign to people because of the fact that you have 30 referenda for 30 different issues as opposed to 1 referenda. Yes?
If people make bad decisions, how do they make good decisions in voting for representatives in low turnout elections with multiple issues?
Okay, so let's talk about low turnout for a second, right? The types of voter turnout you're likely to get on their side of the house is people who are only particularly interested in free trade, right? I don't see why the average person would just turn out and vote for free trade, so that's on their side of the house. But in terms of just like the intelligence that people have, we've shown you why information-wise they're better. We talked about, finally, why lobby groups actually provide a useful perspective that these guys never engage with. When we say that lobby groups can oftentimes give useful perspectives on certain industries and how they interact, they never respond to this. We think that decision-making needs to be balanced. No, thank you. And the problem with their side is they remove all that balance and put it all directly into the hands of the people who can't make good decisions. The final thing I want to speak about then is the impact on free trade agreements. They talked about a couple of things. But firstly, I want to point out that they never engage with the comparative that Dasha gave you. Because every side in this debate has agreed that free trade is generally good. They get less free trade on their side for 2 reasons. For the reasons that, 1, people are likely to reject it because of the fear-mongering and because of the incentives. But what we told you is that other countries are less likely to engage with you and to actually negotiate again when they feel like that will be lost. Because if you negotiate a 5-year free trade deal with China, or like the US, for example, and then your people just reject it, they're not coming to the table again. Furthermore, what this means is they're less likely to go to the table in the first place when they're afraid you're not going to sign it. This was unresponded to. They get less free trade on their side of the house, numerically. But in terms of quality as well, the examples that these guys want to claim for their side actually work for our side. When they talk about NAFTA, we say that NAFTA had 30% approval rating when it first came into existence, meaning that it wouldn't have been passed. But today, under the status quo, it has 70% approval rating, meaning that people like it. Because the 6,000 jobs that they talk about being lost in the short term are compensated by the 60,000 jobs that were gained on our side of the house. When they talk about Australia and the ISDS, that was actually a clause that governments removed from future negotiations because people disliked it in the past. Governments are the only actor that are actually available to change this, and when you have a yes or no referendum, you can't change those types of policies. For those reasons, we're proud to oppose.